Tonight, we're talking about something that's bothered me for years. Something that started as a joke, evolved into a running gag, and eventually became one of the most uncomfortable elements of modern animated television. We're talking about Meg Griffin from Family Guy. And the question we're asking is simple but profound. Is she the most abused character in television history? Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a cartoon. It's comedy. It's not that serious. And you're right, to an extent. But here's the thing about long-running television shows, especially animated ones that exist in a perpetual present tense. They become time capsules. They reveal things about us, about our culture, about what we find funny, and why. And when you really sit down and catalog everything that happens to Meg Griffin over the course of 20-plus seasons and 400-plus episodes, something becomes crystal clear. This isn't just a running gag. This is systematic, relentless, and honestly kind of disturbing. We're going to take our time with this one. We're going to explore how Meg Griffin went from being the relatively normal teenage daughter in a dysfunctional family to becoming television's most reliable punching bag. We'll talk about the voice actress changes, the behind-the-scenes decisions that shaped her character, the cultural impact of the shut up Meg phenomenon, and what it all means for how we think about comedy, representation, and the treatment of teenage girls in media. So get comfortable, maybe grab a drink or a snack, and let's settle in for a deep dive into the strange, sad, and surprisingly complex world of Meg Griffin. To understand Meg Griffin, we need to understand Family Guy itself. We need to go back to the beginning, to understand the ambitions and the context that gave birth to one of the most successful and controversial animated series of all time. Seth Woodbury MacFarlane was born on October 26, 1973, in Kent, Connecticut. From a young age, he showed an extraordinary talent for drawing and animation. He was that kid in school whose notebook margins were filled with cartoon characters, who could capture the likeness of his teachers in a few quick strokes, who dreamed not just of watching cartoons, but of making them. His parents encouraged his artistic pursuits, though they'd later have mixed feelings about the crude, boundary-pushing comedy that would make their son famous. MacFarlane attended the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design, known as RISD to those in the know. This wasn't just any art school. This was the kind of place that produced Gus Van Sant and Shepard Fairey of Obey Giant fame. It was a crucible of creativity, a place where young artists learned not just technique, but vision. At RISD, MacFarlane studied animation with an intensity that impressed his professors. But he wasn't just focused on the technical aspects of the craft. He was developing a voice, a sensibility. He loved classic animation, the golden age of Disney and Warner Brothers. But he also loved the irreverent comedy of Monty Python, the satirical edge of shows like Saturday Night Live, the willingness to go there that characterized the best comedy of the 70s and 80s. It was during his time at RISD that MacFarlane met Mike Henry, who would go on to become a writer and voice actor on Family Guy, lending his voice to characters like Cleveland Brown, Herbert the Pervert, and Consuela the Maid. This friendship would prove instrumental in shaping the world of Family Guy, as Henry's presence in the writer's room and behind the microphone added layers to the show's comedic universe. MacFarlane's thesis film at RISD was called The Life of Larry. It was a short animated piece about a middle-aged man named Larry and his anthropomorphic dog, Steve. The animation was impressive for a student film, showing MacFarlane's command of the medium. But more importantly, it showed his comedic sensibility. Larry was crude, selfish, often inappropriate. The humor was sharp, sometimes shocking. You could see the seeds of what would become Family Guy. The film caught the attention of folks at Hanna-Barbera Productions, the legendary animation house behind The Flintstones, The Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, and countless other beloved shows. They offered MacFarlane a job, and at 22 years old, fresh out of college, he moved to Los Angeles to work in professional animation. At Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane cut his teeth on shows like Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Dexter's Laboratory, and I Am Weasel. These were shows that appealed to kids, but had an edge to them, a knowing wink to older viewers. They were part of Cartoon Network's effort to create content that worked on multiple levels, and working on them taught MacFarlane valuable lessons about timing, about how to construct a joke, about what you could get away with on television. But MacFarlane had bigger ambitions. He wanted to create his own show, something that was unmistakably his. He took the characters from the life of Larry and refined them. Larry became Peter. Steve the dog became Brian. He added a family around them. A wife named Lois, inspired by the classic sitcom Mom, but with more depth. A son named Chris, who would embody teenage awkwardness and stupidity. A daughter named Meg, who would be the relatively normal one, the one who was embarrassed by her family's antics. And Stewie, the baby with a British accent and dreams of world domination, who would become the show's breakout character. MacFarlane created a second short film called Larry and Steve for Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon Showcase series. This was a proving ground for new animated properties, and several successful shows, including The Powerpuff Girls and Courage the Cowardly Dog, got their start here. The short aired in 1997 and caught the attention of executives at Fox. Now, Fox had struck gold with The Simpsons in 1989. That show had changed television, proving that animation could be smart, sophisticated, and appeal to adult audiences. For years, networks had tried to replicate that success. King of the Hill had managed it to some degree, offering a more grounded, observational humor compared to The Simpsons' satirical edge. But Fox wanted more. They wanted the next big thing in adult animation. They saw potential in MacFarlane's work. The characters were distinct. The humor was sharp and irreverent. It felt different from The Simpsons, while still occupying a similar space. In May of 1998, Fox gave MacFarlane $50,000 to produce a 15-minute pilot. For a young animator not yet 25 years old, this was a dream come true and a massive responsibility. MacFarlane threw himself into creating the pilot. He refined the character designs, making Peter Griffin's physique distinctive with his rotund belly and awkward posture. He gave Lois her classic look with red hair and that knowing smile. Chris became the overweight teenage son with a voice that sounded like Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. Meg received her iconic pink beanie and glasses, designed to look relatively plain compared to her glamorous mother. And Stewie, with his football-shaped head and diabolical intelligence, became the show's secret weapon. The pilot episode, Death Has a Shadow, was completed and ready to air. Fox scheduled it for a primetime slot following Super Bowl 33 on January 31st, 1999. This was the best possible launchpad for a new show. Super Bowl audiences were massive, and whatever show aired after the game was guaranteed to be seen by millions of people who might never have encountered it otherwise. And so, on that winter evening in 1999, America met the Griffin family for the first time. Peter got drunk at a stag party and missed work, leading to his termination. Desperate to hide this from Lois, he accepted welfare checks under false pretenses, leading to a series of escalating misadventures. It was crude, it was funny, and it was unmistakably different from anything else on television at the time. The show premiered to a relatively lukewarm reception. Critics were mixed. Some saw it as a promising new entry in the adult animation space. Others dismissed it as a Simpsons ripoff with cruder humor and less heart. The ratings were decent, but not spectacular, ranking 33rd in the Nielsen ratings for the season. For a show airing after the Super Bowl, this was considered underwhelming. Fox, uncertain about the show's potential, initially ordered only 7 episodes for the first season. This was essentially a trial run, a chance to see if the show could find an audience. MacFarlane and his small team of writers and animators worked furiously to produce these episodes, knowing that their future depended on them. What's fascinating is how different these early episodes feel compared to what Family Guy would become. The pacing is different. The cutaway gags that would become the show's signature are present but less frequent. The characters are still finding their voices, their rhythms. And Meg, our subject tonight, is a completely different character. In these early episodes, Meg is portrayed as relatively normal. She's embarrassed by her family's antics, sure, but she's not particularly picked on. She's just a teenage girl trying to navigate high school while dealing with an exceptionally dysfunctional family. There's no shut up Meg. There's no systematic abuse. She's treated with a basic level of dignity and respect, even if she's often exasperated by the chaos around her. The first season wrapped, and the verdict came in. Fox renewed Family Guy for a full season, 21 episodes for season 2. This was validation, proof that the show had potential even if it hadn't yet become a phenomenon. MacFarlane and his team got back to work, ready to expand the world of Quahog, Rhode Island, and delve deeper into the lives of the Griffin family. But there was a problem. One of the voice actors wouldn't be returning. Meg Griffin needed a new voice, and this change, seemingly minor at the time, would have profound implications for the character's future. To understand what Meg Griffin lost when her voice changed, we need to talk about Lacey Chabert and what she brought to the character in that crucial first season. Lacey Nicole Chabert was born on September 30th, 1982, in Purvis, Mississippi. Like MacFarlane, she showed talent from a young age, but her gifts were in performance rather than visual art. She was a natural entertainer, the kind of kid who lit up in front of an audience. Her parents recognized this and supported her pursuit of acting. Chabert's big break came when she was cast in the Broadway production of Les Miserables as young Cosette. This was a prestigious role in one of the most successful musicals of all time. She performed the role from 1991 to 1992, and it established her as a serious young talent. Broadway was and is a proving ground, and succeeding there opened doors. Those doors led to television. In 1994, at just 12 years old, Chabert was cast as Claudia Salinger on the Fox drama series Party of Five. This show was a critical darling, a heartfelt drama about 5 siblings trying to keep their family together after their parents are killed by a drunk driver. It was serious, emotional television, and Chabert's performance as the youngest Salinger daughter earned her critical acclaim and award nominations. Party of Five ran from 1994 to 2000. Making Chabert a household name among a certain demographic. She was the girl next door, talented and wholesome, the kind of actress parents approved of. But she was also ambitious and interested in expanding her range. Voice acting offered a way to do that, to take on different kinds of projects without being typecast. When Family Guy was casting its pilot in 1998, Chabert auditioned for the role of Meg Griffin. At 15 years old, she was close to the character's age, and her voice had a natural quality that MacFarlane and the producers found appealing. She could convey Meg's exasperation, her teenage angst, her desire to be normal despite her family's chaos. Chabert got the role, though interestingly, she went uncredited for her work on the first season. This wasn't unusual for voice work at the time, especially for supporting characters. Voice actors often worked under different contract terms than on-screen actors, and crediting every performer could clutter the opening titles. Still, it meant that many viewers of that first season had no idea who was bringing Meg to life. So what did Chabert's Meg sound like? What did she bring to the character? Listening back to those early episodes, Chabert's Meg has a warmer quality than what came later. Her voice is higher pitched, more traditionally feminine. When Meg gets frustrated with her family, there's an earnestness to it. You believe that this is a girl who genuinely loves her family even when they drive her crazy. There's no edge of desperation or defeat. She's just a normal teenager dealing with abnormal circumstances. In Death Has a Shadow, when Peter loses his job and accepts welfare fraudulently, Meg's role is relatively minor. She reacts to her father's behavior with typical teenage embarrassment. In I Never Met the Dead Man, she gets her driver's license and is desperate to be allowed to drive, leading to conflict with Peter that feels authentically teenage. These are not stories about Meg being abused or scapegoated. They're stories about normal family tensions. Chabert brought a vulnerability to the character. When Meg was disappointed, you felt it. When she was hopeful about something, you rooted for her. The character had dimension, personality beyond just being the butt of jokes. This was important foundational work for the character, establishing who Meg was before the show decided to take her in a very different direction. But Chabert was busy, very busy. She was still starring on Party of Five, which was in its 5th season and required a substantial time commitment. She was also attending school, trying to maintain some semblance of a normal teenage life, despite being a working actress. And Family Guy, while promising, was not yet the cultural phenomenon it would become. It was just another job, one of many projects she was juggling. The recording schedule for animation is different from live-action television. Voice actors typically record their lines individually, not as an ensemble. They come into the studio, receive direction, record their scenes, and leave. It's efficient, but can feel isolated. For someone like Chabert, who was used to the collaborative energy of a live-action set and the immediate feedback of a studio audience, it might have felt less engaging than her other work. As Family Guy moved into production on season 2, the demands increased. More episodes meant more recording sessions, and Chabert's schedule was getting increasingly complicated. Party of Five was entering its final season, which meant intense storylines and emotional material that required her full focus. Her school obligations continued. She was being pulled in multiple directions. Something had to give. The exact circumstances of Chabert's departure have been described differently by different people over the years, which makes sense. Memory is imperfect, and people often remember the same events from different perspectives. What we know for certain is that Lacey Chabert did not continue as the voice of Meg Griffin beyond the first season, and a few episodes of season 2 that had already been recorded. In a 2006 interview with GameSpy, Chabert addressed the situation directly. When asked if she had a grudge against Mila Kunis, who took over the role, she said this: "No, I actually left the show of my own accord, and only because I was in school and doing Party of Five at the time. But I think the show is hilarious, and don't have a grudge against her at all. I think she's a great actress." This paints a picture of an amicable departure. Chabert was simply too busy with other commitments to continue with Family Guy. She left on good terms, wished the show well, and moved on with her career. It's a mature, professional response, and there's no reason to doubt its sincerity. But Seth MacFarlane told a slightly different story. In a 2003 interview with IGN, he said this: "It was just purely a contractual thing." Lacey Chabert: "I think there was a mistake in her contract, and I guess she had not intended to be involved for, the full run of the show. I don't even remember. To be honest, I don't really, to this day, know what it was. It was nothing. There was no tension or anything. She wanted to go, and she was very cool about it." So MacFarlane suggests it was a contract issue, possibly an error in how the agreement was structured. Maybe Chabert's representatives didn't anticipate Family Guy getting renewed, or didn't realize how demanding the production schedule would be. Whatever the case, MacFarlane emphasizes that there was no drama, no bad blood. Chabert wanted out, and they accommodated her. The truth probably incorporates elements of both explanations. Chabert was genuinely busy with school and Party of Five, and there may have been contractual complications that made continuing difficult or unappealing. The important point is that everyone involved agrees it was handled professionally and without animosity. Still, losing your lead voice actress for a main character after just one season is not ideal. The producers were faced with a decision. They could recast Meg, bringing in a new actress to take over the role. Or they could write the character out, restructure the family dynamic without her. Given that Meg was one of the 5 core family members, writing her out would have fundamentally changed the show. So recasting was really the only option. Auditions were held. The producers saw countless actresses, looking for someone who could capture Meg's essence while potentially bringing something new to the character. They needed someone who could commit long-term, who had the vocal range to convey Meg's various emotional states, who could handle the show's particular brand of humor. And then Mila Kunis walked into the audition room. Mila Kunis was 15 years old when she auditioned to replace Lacey Chabert as the voice of Meg Griffin. She was already a working actress with a promising career trajectory, but she wasn't yet the movie star she would become. Understanding who Kunis was at this point in her life helps us understand what she brought to Meg Griffin and how the character would evolve under her stewardship. Milena Markovna Kunis was born on August 14, 1983, in Chernivtsi, Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union. Her family immigrated to the United States in 1991 when Mila was 7 years old. They settled in Los Angeles with $700 to their name, not speaking English, facing all the challenges that come with starting over in a new country. Kunis has spoken in interviews about how difficult this transition was. She was bullied at school for her accent and her status as an immigrant. She felt isolated and struggled to make friends. Her parents enrolled her in acting classes partly as a way to help her learn English and gain confidence. They couldn't have known that this decision would launch her into a successful career. Kunis started auditioning for commercials and small roles. She booked her first gig in 1994, a Barbie commercial. More work followed. She appeared on shows like Days of Our Lives, Baywatch, and Seventh Heaven. These were small roles, but they gave her experience in front of the camera and helped her develop her craft. Her breakthrough came in 1998 when she was cast as Jackie Burkhart on That 70s Show. This was a major network sitcom for Fox, the same network that aired Family Guy. Jackie was a vain, self-centered, fashion-obsessed teenager, and Kunis played her with perfect comedic timing. She made Jackie funny rather than just annoying, which is a difficult balance to strike. There's a famous story about how Kunis got cast on That 70s Show. The show's producers were looking for actors who were 18 or older to play the teenage characters. Kunis was only 14 at the time of her audition. When asked if she was going to be 18, she cleverly replied, "Well, I'll be 18 on my birthday." She didn't specify which birthday, and the producers assumed she meant her upcoming 18th birthday. They cast her, and it wasn't until later that they discovered she was actually several years younger than they thought. By then, she was doing great work, so they kept her. This story reveals something important about Kunis as a young actress. She was savvy. She understood how the industry worked. She was willing to be strategic to get opportunities. And once she got those opportunities, she delivered. This would serve her well in voicing Meg Griffin. When Kunis auditioned for Family Guy in 1999, she was already a regular on a successful network sitcom. She had experience with comedy, with timing, with taking direction. But voice acting is different from on-camera work. You can't rely on facial expressions or physical comedy. Everything has to come through in your vocal performance. MacFarlane and the producers were impressed by Kunis's audition, but they gave her specific notes. Most notably, MacFarlane told her to slow down. Kunis has admitted that she tends to speak quickly, and in voice acting, that can make dialogue hard to follow. She needed to be more deliberate, to let each word land. She worked on this, came back for a callback, and demonstrated that she could adjust her performance based on direction. MacFarlane later said that Kunis had a very natural quality to Meg, and that she was in a lot of ways almost more right for the character. This is interesting praise. It suggests that while Chabert did good work, Kunis brought something that better aligned with where the producers wanted to take the character. What was that quality? Listening to Kunis's Meg compared to Chabert's, there's a slightly harder edge. Her voice is a bit lower, a bit more monotone. Where Chabert's Meg sounded hopeful and earnest, Kunis's Meg sounds more resigned, more worn down. Even in those early episodes where Meg isn't being particularly abused, Kunis's performance suggests a character who is used to disappointment. This tonal shift would become more pronounced as the show evolved and Meg's role changed. Kunis's voice could convey desperation, frustration, and defeat in ways that felt authentic because they weren't played for big laughs. She could deliver a line like "shut up," Meg directed at herself, with a flatness that was somehow both funny and heartbreaking. Kunis's first episode as Meg was Da Boom, the third episode of Season 2, which aired in December of 1999. This was a special Y2K-themed episode where the Millennium Bug causes a nuclear apocalypse and the Griffin family must survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Because of production order versus broadcast order, there was actually some back and forth between Chabert and Kunis voicing Meg in Season 2. Some episodes aired with Chabert's voice, some with Kunis's, creating a strange inconsistency for viewers watching in real time. But by the end of Season 2, Kunis was firmly established as Meg Griffin, and she would remain in that role for the next 20-plus years, recording over 400 episodes. It would become one of her most enduring professional relationships, even as her movie career exploded with roles in films like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Black Swan, Bad Moms, and the Ted Franchise. In a 2022 interview, Kunis reflected on her time as Meg. "I love Meg," she said. "I mean, how can you not after 400 episodes of voicing this character? I feel like I grew up with her. She's low-key my favorite character on the show. She's also called it the best job ever, expressing genuine affection for the character and appreciation for the steady work and creative fulfillment the role has provided. This is important to note because it complicates our understanding of Meg's abuse on the show. Kunis, the person who voices Meg and presumably has the most intimate understanding of the character, doesn't seem troubled by how Meg is treated. She finds it funny. She enjoys playing the role. This doesn't mean the treatment isn't problematic, but it does remind us that there's a difference between a fictional character and the real people who bring them to life. But before we can fully explore what happened to Meg Griffin after Kunis took over, we need to understand what happened to Family Guy itself, because the show went through some dramatic changes that would profoundly affect how all the characters were written. The story of Family Guy's cancellation and subsequent resurrection is one of the most remarkable narratives in television history, and it's crucial to understanding what happened to Meg Griffin, because the show that came back from the dead was not the same show that had been canceled. Let's set the scene. It's 2002. Family Guy has aired 3 seasons on Fox. The ratings have been inconsistent. The show has found a devoted fan base, particularly among young men aged 18 to 34, but it's never been a massive ratings hit. Fox, notorious for its impatience with shows that don't immediately deliver huge numbers, has been moving Family Guy around the schedule, airing it at different times on different nights. This makes it hard for viewers to find the show, which depresses ratings further, creating a vicious cycle. In May of 2002, Fox announced that Family Guy was canceled. The 50-episode order was complete. There would be no season 4. The Griffin family was done. For MacFarlane and the writers, this was devastating, but not entirely surprising. They'd been fighting for survival for 3 seasons, always aware that cancellation could come at any moment. MacFarlane moved on to developing American Dad, another animated sitcom for Fox that would take a slightly different approach to satirical comedy. Family Guy went into syndication and began airing on cable networks like Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block. And then, something unexpected happened. People discovered the show. In syndication, Family Guy flourished. The cable networks aired episodes multiple times, allowing viewers to catch up on what they'd missed or rewatch episodes they loved. The show's particular brand of humor, rapid-fire jokes, pop culture references, cutaway gags, envelope-pushing content, translated beautifully to the rewatching experience. You could notice new jokes you'd missed the first time. You could memorize your favorite bits and anticipate them with pleasure. Adult Swim, in particular, became a haven for Family Guy. The network targeted exactly the demographic that loved the show, and they programmed it heavily. Family Guy episodes were airing multiple times every night, and the ratings were spectacular. At one point, Family Guy was delivering better ratings in syndication than it had ever achieved during its original run on Fox. Simultaneously, Fox released the first 3 seasons of Family Guy on DVD, and this is where things got truly unprecedented. The DVD sales were phenomenal. We're talking multi-platinum, breaking records, becoming one of the best-selling TV on DVD properties of all time. People who had never seen the show during its original run were buying the DVDs and falling in love with it. Fans who had seen it were buying the DVDs to own it, to share it with friends, to watch it over and over. The economics of this situation were impossible for Fox to ignore. They owned a property that was making money hand over fist in syndication and home video, delivering exactly the demographic advertisers wanted, and they'd canceled it. The decision looked increasingly foolish as Family Guy's second life demonstrated its true commercial potential. In 2004, Fox made an announcement that shocked the television industry. They were bringing Family Guy back. They ordered new episodes. The show would return for a 4th season in 2005. A canceled show had been uncanceled purely because of its financial success in other media. This was unprecedented. MacFarlane and the writers were thrilled, but also cautious. They'd moved on. They'd developed American Dad. They'd gotten used to the idea that Family Guy was over. Now, they had to figure out how to revive the show, how to capture what made it work, while potentially evolving it beyond what it had been. The show that returned in May of 2005, with the episode North by North Quahog, was similar to what had come before, but different in crucial ways. The pacing was faster. The cutaway gags were more frequent and more random. The humor was edgier, more willing to go to uncomfortable places. The show had seen how well it worked in syndication, had understood which jokes and which characters resonated most with fans, and it leaned into those elements. This is where things start to change significantly for Meg Griffin. In the first 3 seasons, Meg was mistreated occasionally, but it wasn't a defining characteristic. She was the straight man, the normal one, sometimes the voice of reason. Yes, there were jokes at her expense. Yes, Peter was sometimes a bad father to her. But it wasn't systematic. It wasn't every episode. It wasn't the central joke of her character. But in season 4 and beyond, something shifted. The writers, predominantly male and unsure how to write a teenage girl character with depth, made a decision. Rather than developing Meg into a more 3-dimensional character, they would make her the show's designated punching bag. Every family sitcom needs someone to dump on, they reasoned. Someone has to be the butt of jokes, and Meg, being the least clearly defined of the family members, became that person. Seth MacFarlane later admitted this explicitly. In an interview that would become controversial, he explained that the writer's room was mostly male, and they didn't know how to write for a teenage girl. So they found it therapeutic to put Meg through the ringer. Let that sink in for a moment. The show's creator admitted that the systematic abuse of a teenage girl character was therapeutic for the predominantly male writing staff. When this quote circulated on social media years later, fans were understandably upset. The obvious solution to not knowing how to write a teenage girl would be to hire female writers who could bring that perspective. But Family Guy's writer's room remained predominantly male for many seasons, and Meg's treatment only intensified. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, a slow erosion of Meg's dignity that accelerated as the seasons progressed. But if we're looking for a turning point, for the moment when the show made a conscious decision about what Meg would become, season 4 is where we find it. The season 4 premiere, North by North Quahog, doesn't focus particularly on Meg. It's about the family taking a road trip, with Peter and Lois trying to spice up their marriage. Meg is present, but not central to the action. She's treated as she had been in previous seasons, a relatively normal teenager who rolls her eyes at her parents' antics. But then came the 7th episode of season 4, titled Don't Make Me Over. This episode would prove to be pivotal in Meg's evolution, or devolution depending on your perspective. The premise is simple enough. Meg tries to join the Flag Girl Squad at her school, a group of popular girls who perform at football games. She's rejected, humiliated in front of her peers. The reason given is brutal and direct. She's told she's ugly. Not unpopular, not awkward, ugly. This is the first time the show explicitly makes Meg's supposed physical unattractiveness a central plot point. Prior to this, Meg had been portrayed as plain, ordinary, unremarkable. But unremarkable is not the same as ugly. The show crosses a line here, moving from Meg being socially awkward to being supposedly physically repulsive. The episode continues with Meg getting a makeover. With new clothes, makeup, and blonde hair, suddenly she's beautiful. She becomes popular, gets invited to parties, attracts the attention of boys. The family barely recognizes her. For a brief moment, it seems like the show might be making a point about superficiality, about how arbitrary and cruel high school social hierarchies can be. But then the makeover wears off. Meg returns to her normal appearance, and with it, returns to her status as a social pariah. The lesson the show seems to teach is not that society is shallow, but that Meg really is ugly, and her brief moment of happiness was an illusion built on false pretenses. It's a remarkably cruel message to send, especially for a show that could reach impressionable teenagers. What makes this episode even more significant is that it establishes a template. From this point forward, Meg's supposed ugliness becomes a running gag. Characters will react with horror at the sight of her. In one later episode, 2 people douse themselves in gasoline, light themselves on fire, and jump out a window after looking at her. In another, a carnival worker guesses her weight as simply a lot. The jokes pile up, episode after episode, season after season. But the physical appearance jokes, as cruel as they are, represent only one dimension of Meg's abuse. The emotional and psychological abuse from her family is even more disturbing, precisely because it comes from the people who are supposed to love her most. Peter Griffin, Meg's father, becomes the primary source of this abuse. In the early seasons, Peter was a bad father to all his children in various ways. He was neglectful, self-absorbed, often choosing his own desires over his kids' needs. But he was that way with Chris and Stewie too. There wasn't a particular targeting of Meg. That changes in season 4 and beyond. Peter begins actively expressing his dislike for Meg. He tells her to shut up when she tries to speak. He makes it clear he doesn't want her around. He forgets her name. He introduces her to people as his daughter Meg, then immediately says, "Shut up, Meg," before she can respond. The catchphrase "Shut up, Meg" becomes so ubiquitous that it transcends the show. It becomes a meme, a cultural reference point. People who have never watched a full episode of Family Guy know "Shut up, Meg." And this cultural penetration has strange effects. It normalizes the idea that it's funny to arbitrarily silence a teenage girl, to dismiss her without cause. Let's talk about some specific examples of Peter's treatment of Meg, because the cumulative effect is more powerful than any single incident. In one episode, Peter tells everyone that Meg died. He fakes her death, holds a funeral, accepts condolences. The joke is that no one really cares. The family moves on easily. When Meg returns, alive and confused, Peter is annoyed that his lie has been exposed. In another episode, the family goes on vacation and needs to leave someone behind because there isn't room in the car. They choose Meg. Not because of any logical reason, just because she's Meg. When she was a baby, there are multiple flashbacks showing Peter and Lois trying to abandon her at fire stations. These are played for laughs, but they're establishing that Meg was unwanted from birth. At Christmas, when the family opens presents, Meg's gift is literally an empty box. Nothing inside, no explanation, just empty. When she reacts with understandable disappointment, the family acts like she's being unreasonable. Peter changes Meg's birth certificate so her legal name is Megatron instead of Megan, referencing the Transformers character. He does this without her knowledge or consent, just because he thinks it's funny. When she discovers this years later, he shrugs it off. During family dinners, Peter will suddenly tell Meg to go to her room for no reason. She'll be sitting quietly, not causing any trouble, and he'll arbitrarily banish her from the table. When she asks why, he can't give a reason. It's just that her presence is unwelcome. These aren't occasional moments of bad parenting. This is a systematic pattern of rejection, humiliation, and emotional abuse. And Peter isn't the only family member participating. Lois, Meg's mother, is more passively cruel, but perhaps more insidious because of it. Where Peter's abuse is overt and loud, Lois's takes the form of neglect and subtle put-downs. She rarely defends Meg when Peter attacks her. She often joins in with cutting remarks about Meg's appearance or social status. When Meg needs support or comfort, Lois is conspicuously absent. There's a particularly telling dynamic in how Lois treats Meg versus how she treats Chris. Chris, the son, is arguably even less intelligent and socially capable than Meg. But Lois is patient with him, even indulgent. She makes excuses for his behavior and protects him from consequences. Meg receives no such consideration. If anything, Lois seems embarrassed by Meg's existence, as if having an unpopular daughter reflects poorly on her. In one episode, Meg gets collagen injections that go wrong, leaving her face severely deformed. Lois's response is not concern or sympathy, but rather a sense that Meg deserves this outcome. She refuses to help Meg get it fixed. Only when Meg's appearance bothers Lois does she take action, and even then, it's framed as Lois doing Meg a favor rather than a mother caring for her injured child. Lois also frequently forgets about Meg or excludes her from family activities. She'll plan events and simply not invite Meg. She'll make food for everyone except Meg. These aren't innocent oversights. They happen too consistently to be accidents. They're patterns that communicate clearly. You don't matter. You're not really part of this family. Chris, Meg's younger brother, is largely indifferent to her. He neither actively abuses her like Peter, nor passively neglects her like Lois. Instead, he simply doesn't think about her much at all. When he does interact with Meg, it's usually to join in mocking her, following his father's lead. There's no sibling bond between them. No sense that they're in the trenches together, dealing with their dysfunctional family. Chris has absorbed the family's attitude toward Meg and reflects it back without questioning it. Stewie, the baby, is intellectually superior to everyone in the family. His relationship with Meg is dismissive in a different way. He sees her as beneath his notice, too boring and ordinary to merit his attention. When he does acknowledge her, it's usually with cutting insults delivered in his British accent. Because Stewie is supposed to be a genius, his contempt for Meg carries an implicit message. If the smartest person in the family thinks she's worthless, maybe she is. But perhaps the most hurtful betrayal comes from Brian, the family dog, and supposedly the most empathetic member of the household. In early seasons, Brian showed some kindness toward Meg. He would listen to her problems. He seemed to recognize that she was treated unfairly. This made him a beacon of hope, a suggestion that at least one family member saw Meg's humanity. But as the show progressed, Brian's character became more cynical and self-absorbed, and his treatment of Meg reflected this change. He began joining in the mockery. He actively avoided her. When Meg clearly needed someone to talk to, Brian would make excuses to get away. His rejection stung precisely because it had once seemed like he might be different. There's an episode called Barely Legal, where Meg develops a crush on Brian. She's desperate for affection, for someone to see value in her, and Brian has been kind to her. The crush becomes an obsession. When Brian makes it clear he's not interested, Meg's reaction is extreme and disturbing. She becomes threatening, violent even. The episode is played for laughs, but it reveals something important. Meg has been so starved of love and validation that even the slightest kindness sends her into an unhealthy spiral. This episode also demonstrates a pattern that repeats throughout the series. Whenever a man shows Meg even a modicum of attention or kindness, she becomes obsessed with him. She's willing to do anything, overlook any red flag, compromise any principle, just to hold on to that crumb of affection. This happens with Brian. It happens with Joe Swanson, the family's paraplegic neighbor. It happens with numerous other characters throughout the series. The show plays this for laughs, presenting Meg as desperate and pathetic. But if we step back and think about it, this is a logical, psychological response to her circumstances. If you spend your entire life being rejected by everyone, especially your own family, you would absolutely overreact to the first person who treats you like a human being. The show is depicting the symptoms of severe emotional abuse and neglect, then mocking those symptoms rather than examining their cause. Beyond the family, the entire town of Quahog seems to be in on the joke. Meg's peers at school bully her relentlessly. She's the target of pranks, cruelty, and social exclusion. The show's other main teenage character, Connie D'Amico, serves as Meg's primary antagonist at school. Connie is everything Meg isn't. Popular, confident, mean. She makes Meg's life miserable and faces no consequences. But it's not just teenagers who abuse Meg. Adults in Quahog also participate. Teachers ignore her or mock her. Neighbors avoid her. Random strangers react with disgust at her presence. The show creates a reality where literally everyone in Meg's life, from her closest family to complete strangers, treats her with contempt. There is no safe space, no refuge, no one in her corner. This isolation is perhaps the most unrealistic and disturbing aspect of how the show handles Meg. In real life, even people who are unpopular or struggling usually have someone, a friend, a teacher, a relative, someone who recognizes their worth. The complete absence of any such person in Meg's life moves beyond comedy and into something that feels almost sadistic. The show does occasionally give Meg friends, other girls who are also social outcasts. Patty, Esther, and Ruth appear in various episodes as Meg's companions. But these friendships are portrayed as associations of losers. The message is not that Meg has found people who appreciate her, but rather that she's settled for other rejects because no one better will have her. And even these friends sometimes participate in mocking Meg or excluding her. Meg's romantic life is a catalog of humiliations and dangers. Every attempt she makes to find love, or even just affection, ends in disaster. Let's run through some of the lowlights. She dates a guy who, during their date, drugs her, takes her to a motel, and harvests one of her kidneys while she's unconscious. When she wakes up and realizes what's happened, she doesn't call the police or run away. Instead, she reminds him that he promised her a full day together, so he owes her a proper date. They spend the day together. He gives her kidney back in a jar, and she keeps it on her shelf. The show presents this as romantic in some twisted way, rather than as a horrifying crime. In another episode, she briefly dates a guy who breaks up with her the moment he sees her naked. The implication being that her body is so repulsive that it overrides any emotional connection they might have had. The scene is designed to humiliate Meg as thoroughly as possible. She becomes obsessed with a corpse at one point, carrying around a dead body and treating it as her boyfriend because at least a corpse can't reject her. This is played for laughs, but stop and think about what this means. A teenage girl is so desperate for companionship that she prefers a dead body to being alone. That's not funny. That's a cry for help. One of the few genuinely healthy relationships Meg has on the show is with an Amish boy named Ezekiel. They meet, develop real feelings for each other, and for once, it seems like Meg might have found someone who genuinely cares about her. But because of conflicts between their families, the relationship can't continue. Even when Meg finds something real, circumstances conspire to take it away from her. Throughout all of these romantic disasters, the show never suggests that Meg deserves better or that the treatment she receives is wrong. Instead, the implication is always that she should be grateful for any attention at all, no matter how degrading or dangerous. This is a deeply troubling message to send, particularly to young viewers who might be struggling with their own feelings of inadequacy. As the abuse intensifies and continues year after year, we start to see Meg develop darker traits. This is presented as her natural character development, but it's more accurately described as the psychological consequences of sustained trauma. Meg becomes increasingly unstable and sometimes violent. In the episode Dial Meg for Murder, she's sent to prison for identity fraud. While there, she becomes tough and aggressive, learning to defend herself through violence. When she's released and returns home, she's become someone her family fears. She beats Peter severely, even shoving his face against the stairs in a recreation of a scene from American History X. She sexually assaults him in the shower with a loofah. Now, the show frames this as Meg finally standing up for herself, and there's something satisfying about watching her fight back after years of abuse. But the execution is deeply uncomfortable. Meg doesn't just defend herself, she becomes an abuser herself, using violence and sexual assault as tools of revenge. The show is suggesting that victims of abuse inevitably become abusers themselves, which is not only false, but harmful. In other episodes, Meg is revealed to be an animal killer, one of the classic warning signs of a serial killer. She keeps a baby hidden in her school locker. She makes casual references to self-harm, cutting herself as a way to cope with her pain. These aren't treated as serious mental health crises that need intervention. They're throwaway jokes, quick gags to shock the audience. The self-harm revelation is particularly disturbing. In one scene, Lois accuses Meg of eating to solve her problems. Meg snaps back that she doesn't eat to solve her problems, she cuts herself, then asks sarcastically if that's better. It's delivered as a punchline, but cutting is a serious symptom of psychological distress, particularly common among adolescent girls who feel they have no control over their lives. For the show to use it as a joke demonstrates a cavalier attitude toward mental health. Meg has also displayed suicidal ideation multiple times throughout the series. She makes references to wanting to die or wishing she had never been born. In one episode, she tells someone that if they don't be her prom date, she'll go upstairs and eat a whole bag of peanuts, then has to clarify that she's allergic to peanuts when her parents stare at her blankly. She's literally threatening suicide, and her parents don't even register it. These dark developments in Meg's character are framed as comedy, but they're actually realistic depictions of what happens to someone subjected to sustained emotional abuse. They show the ways people adapt to trauma, the coping mechanisms they develop, the damage that's done to their psyche. The fact that the show presents these as jokes rather than tragedies speaks to its fundamental misunderstanding of what it's depicting. But perhaps no episode crystallizes the show's attitude toward Meg better than Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10. This episode would become one of the most controversial in the entire series, and for good reason. The setup is that the family takes some bad clams and experiences collective hallucinations. But Meg, the only one who didn't eat the clams, remains sober and has to deal with her tripping family members. This gives her a moment of clarity, a chance to see her family's dysfunction from the outside. And Meg snaps. She finally, after 10 seasons of abuse, stands up to her family. She calls them out on everything. She tells Peter he's a terrible father. She tells Lois she's a negligent mother. She expresses all the pain and anger that's been building for years. For viewers who have watched Meg suffer, this moment feels cathartic. Finally, someone is saying out loud that the Emperor has no clothes. The family is shocked. They're not used to Meg fighting back. Without their punching bag, they start turning on each other. Peter and Lois fight. Chris becomes insecure. Stewie regresses. The family dynamics fall apart. So what does the show do with this setup? Does it use this as a moment for the family to recognize their cruelty and make changes? Does it give Meg a real victory? No. Instead, Brian takes Meg aside and explains to her that she's the family's lightning rod. Her role is to absorb all the dysfunction and abuse so that the rest of the family doesn't have to turn on each other. She's the release valve that keeps the family from imploding. And Brian suggests that Meg should accept this role for the greater good of keeping the family together. And Meg does. She goes back to her family and apologizes for standing up for herself. She accepts her role as the scapegoat. She agrees to continue absorbing abuse so that everyone else can be happy. The family dynamic returns to normal, with Meg once again as the punching bag. This episode was universally panned by critics and fans alike. Kevin McFarland of the AV Club wrote that he felt bad about Meg becoming the scapegoat, not because she's a good character, but because instead of working to make her appreciated or comedically valuable, Family Guy spent years going down the path of least resistance and simply joined the fan chorus of hatred. Kate Moon from TV Fanatic called the episode contrived and uninteresting. On Reddit's Raised by Narcissists community, users expressed their discomfort with the episode, noting how closely it mirrored real abusive family dynamics. One user wrote that they got that there was no entertainment value in suddenly treating a scapegoat character like a normal person, but the whole thing made them cringe. The episode is disturbing because it explicitly acknowledges the abuse, labels it correctly as scapegoating, and then justifies it. The message is clear. Meg's abuse serves a purpose. It's necessary for the family to function. She should accept it quietly. This is exactly the kind of reasoning used in real abusive families to manipulate victims into staying silent. You're holding the family together. If you rock the boat, everything will fall apart. Think of your siblings. Don't be selfish. These are phrases abuse victims hear, tactics used to keep them compliant. For the show to use this dynamic as a plot point and then endorse it rather than critique it is genuinely harmful. The episode also fails on a basic storytelling level. If the show wanted to maintain the status quo of Meg being abused, fine. But don't give her a moment of empowerment and then take it away in a way that asks the audience to see her submission as noble. Either commit to changing the dynamic or don't bring it up. This halfway measure satisfies no one and makes everyone uncomfortable. After Seahorse Seashell Party aired, there was some discussion among fans about whether the show would course correct. Maybe the backlash would make the writers reconsider their approach to Meg. Maybe season 11 would be different. It wasn't. If anything, Meg's abuse intensified in seasons 8 through 14. These seasons represent the absolute nadir of Meg's treatment on the show. The jokes became more extreme, more cruel, more disturbing. It's as if the show, having been called out for the abuse, decided to double down rather than pull back. During this period, we got episodes where Meg's mere presence causes people to violently harm themselves. We got jokes about her being so ugly that hazmat suits are needed to look at her. We got Peter openly saying he doesn't love her and wishes she'd never been born. We got the family excluding her from vacations, meals, conversations, and celebrations with increasing cruelty. The writers seem to be operating under the assumption that if they made the jokes more outrageous, more over the top, they'd somehow become funny again through sheer absurdity. But that's not how it worked. Instead, the jokes just became uncomfortable. Viewers weren't laughing with the show at the absurdity. They were cringing at the relentlessness. It's worth noting that during this same period, other characters on the show were also being written more extremely. Peter became more aggressively stupid and destructive. Quagmire's sexual predator characteristics became more pronounced and disturbing. Brian became more pretentious and unlikable. The show in general was pushing boundaries, trying to find new ways to shock and provoke. But Meg's situation was different because she was the victim. When Peter does something terrible, he's the active agent. When Quagmire is creepy, he's the perpetrator. But Meg is always on the receiving end. She never gets to be the one causing chaos. She's always the one suffering it. This creates a fundamentally different viewing experience. Let's talk about some specific lowlights from this period. In the episode A Fistful of Meg, she's being bullied at school by a violent girl. Eventually, Meg fights back and defeats her bully. How does she do it? By being gross. The show's suggestion is that Meg is so repulsive that even a hardened bully can't handle it. It frames Meg's supposed ugliness as her only weapon, her only source of power. Even when Meg wins, she loses. In Brian the Closer, Brian loses his teeth in an accident. The family refuses to help him get them fixed. Meg is singled out as particularly uncaring, which is ironic given how little care she receives from the family. The episode seems designed to make every character as unlikable as possible, but Meg's participation in cruelty feels especially wrong given her own victimization. In Quagmire and Meg, Meg spends time with Quagmire, and the family freaks out because they know what Quagmire does to women. Here's the interesting thing about this episode. The family suddenly cares about Meg. They want to protect her from Quagmire's predatory behavior. It's one of the few times the show acknowledges that Meg is vulnerable and that they have a responsibility to keep her safe. But even this protective instinct is played as being about their discomfort rather than genuine care for Meg. They don't want Meg to be with Quagmire because it's awkward for them, not because they're worried about her well-being. Once the situation is resolved, they go right back to treating her terribly. It's a brief glimpse of what the family could be, immediately squashed. The pattern during these seasons is depressingly consistent. Meg tries to do something, assert herself, find happiness. The universe conspires against her. She's humiliated, rejected, or harmed. The family either participates in her humiliation or stands by watching. And then we move on to the next episode where it all happens again. There's no character growth, no arc, no sense that Meg is learning or evolving. She's static, permanently frozen as the family punching bag. This is particularly frustrating because animation allows for things that live action doesn't. Characters don't age in real time. You can maintain a status quo indefinitely, but that doesn't mean you should. Even shows that don't do serialized storytelling usually allow characters to develop, to have victories and setbacks, to feel like they're on some kind of journey. Meg is denied even this. She exists in a perpetual state of misery, with no hope of escape or improvement. It's Groundhog Day, but instead of learning and growing, Meg just suffers the same indignities over and over forever. The relentlessness of Meg's suffering raises an interesting question about the nature of comedy. What makes something funny versus just mean? When does a joke cross the line from edgy to cruel? Comedy has always had a complicated relationship with suffering. Some of the funniest moments in television and film come from characters experiencing humiliation, physical pain, or social rejection. The key is usually context, framing, and consequences. In shows like The Office or Curb Your Enthusiasm, characters regularly suffer embarrassment and social disaster. But there are key differences from Meg's situation. First, the characters in those shows are usually architects of their own misfortune. Michael Scott's awkwardness comes from his own obliviousness. Larry David's disasters stem from his own neuroses and poor decisions. They're not innocent victims. They're complicit in their own suffering. Second, those shows have variety. Characters win and lose, have good days and bad days. No one is permanently designated as the sole recipient of misery. Everyone gets their turn being the butt of the joke. Third, there's usually a sense that the characters will be okay. The suffering is temporary. They'll recover. Life will go on. There's no permanent damage to their psyche or well-being. Meg's situation violates all these principles. She's not responsible for her mistreatment. She's targeted specifically and consistently. And there's no sense that she'll ever escape or recover. The suffering has warped her psychology, changed who she is as a person. The damage is permanent. This is what moves Meg's treatment from edgy comedy to something that feels more like bullying. And when you factor in that Meg is supposed to be a teenager, it becomes even more uncomfortable. The show is essentially depicting the sustained emotional abuse of a child and asking us to find it funny. McFarlane and the writers might argue that it's all fictional, that Meg isn't real, that no actual teenager is being harmed. And technically, that's true. But media doesn't exist in a vacuum. The messages shows send matter. The normalized behaviors and attitudes filter out into the culture. When Family Guy presents systematic abuse of a teenage girl as not just acceptable, but hilarious, what does that teach viewers? When shut up, Meg becomes a catchphrase that people use in real life. What message does that send to actual teenage girls who are already struggling with self-esteem and social acceptance? The show has been particularly influential with young male viewers. Multiple studies have shown that Family Guy's core demographic is men aged 18 to 34, but the show is also popular with teenage boys. These are formative years for developing attitudes about gender, relationships, and appropriate behavior. What are they learning from how the Griffin family treats Meg? There's research suggesting that media consumption can influence attitudes and behaviors, particularly when messages are repeated consistently over time. If you watch hundreds of episodes where it's funny to dismiss and demean a teenage girl, where her protests are always overruled, where her suffering is entertainment, what subtle lessons are you internalizing? Now, to be fair to Family Guy, the show is clearly not meant to be a role model. It's satire, deliberately offensive, pushing boundaries. The characters are cartoonishly awful people, and the show doesn't pretend otherwise. Presumably, viewers understand that they shouldn't emulate Peter Griffin's behavior, but satire requires a clear target and a consistent point of view. When The Simpsons mocks Homer's stupidity, we're laughing at toxic masculinity and American mediocrity. When South Park pushes boundaries, it's usually clear what the show thinks is actually wrong versus what it's defending. Family Guy's satire is often murkier. It's hard to tell what the show actually believes versus what it's just doing for shock value. With Meg, it's genuinely unclear whether we're supposed to see her treatment as wrong. Sometimes the show seems to acknowledge its abuse and condemns it. Other times, the show endorses it or presents it as necessary. The inconsistency makes it hard to know what message we're supposed to receive. And beyond any specific message or lesson, there's the simple fact that watching someone suffer relentlessly is not fun. It stops being funny and starts being depressing. Even viewers who aren't thinking deeply about gender politics or media influence often express discomfort with Meg's treatment. It's too much, too relentless, too cruel. It drags the show down even when the other plot lines are funny. Let's talk about the cultural impact of Meg Griffin beyond just the show itself. Because over the course of 20+ seasons, Meg has become more than just a character. She's a cultural symbol, a meme, a reference point. And the way she's been used in broader culture reveals a lot about how the show's treatment of her has been received and interpreted. The "Shut Up Meg" catchphrase, as mentioned before, has penetrated deep into popular culture. You don't need to watch Family Guy to know it. It's used on social media, in comment sections, in real-life conversations. People say it to dismiss someone they disagree with, to silence an opinion they don't like, to tell someone they think is annoying to be quiet. The phrase has become divorced from its original context. Many people using it don't think about where it comes from or what it represents. It's just a funny thing to say. But trace it back to its source, and you find a father arbitrarily silencing his daughter, a family systematically dismissing a teenage girl's voice. The cultural adoption of "Shut Up, Meg" as a neutral or funny phrase is, in some ways, more disturbing than its use on the show. On TikTok and other social media platforms, Meg Griffin content is hugely popular. There are compilation videos of Meg's worst moments, set to sad music, racking up millions of views. There are memes comparing relatable feelings of rejection to Meg's experiences. There are people cosplaying as Meg at conventions. What's interesting is that most of this content is sympathetic to Meg. The people making and sharing it identify with her. They see themselves in her suffering. She's become an avatar for anyone who's ever felt rejected, dismissed, or inadequate. In this context, Meg is not a joke, but a tragedy. A character whose pain resonates because it mirrors real experiences. The subreddit Raised by Narcissists, a community for people recovering from abusive family situations, has had multiple discussions about Meg Griffin. Members note how accurately the show depicts certain abusive family dynamics, particularly scapegoating. They talk about how watching the show can be triggering because Meg's treatment so closely mirrors their own experiences. One user wrote that they had to stop watching Family Guy because the Meg plots weren't funny to them. They were traumatic. They'd lived that life. They knew what it was like to be the family lightning rod, absorbing dysfunction so everyone else could pretend to be okay. Seeing it played for laughs felt like a betrayal, a dismissal of their real suffering. This creates an interesting split in how Meg is received. For some viewers, particularly those without personal experience of family abuse, Meg's suffering is absurd comedy, so over the top that it's clearly not real. For others, particularly those who have been scapegoated in their own families, Meg's suffering is painfully accurate, triggering precisely because of how well it captures their reality. The show seems to be aiming for the first interpretation, but accidentally achieving the second. They want Meg to be ridiculous, but they've made her realistic. They want her abuse to be funny, but they've made it traumatic. There's also been a darker side to Meg's cultural impact, one that the show probably didn't anticipate or intend. Because Meg is portrayed as desperate for any male attention, because she's shown as willing to do anything for affection, she's become a target for sexualized content online. Rule 34, the internet adage that if something exists, there's pornographic content of it, applies to Meg extensively. This is particularly problematic because Meg is depicted as a minor, a high school student who's perpetually 16 or 17 years old. The sexualization of teenage characters is always questionable, but it's especially disturbing when applied to a character who's consistently portrayed as vulnerable, desperate, and unable to advocate for herself. Some of this content tries to present itself as empowering, as giving Meg the love and validation she deserves. But it's still adult content featuring a teenage character, and it's still rooted in the dynamic the show established, that Meg is so desperate she'll accept anything. The show bears some responsibility for this. By consistently framing Meg as sexually available, willing to do anything for male attention, unable to set boundaries, they created a character that was ripe for this kind of exploitation. They may not have intended it, but intent isn't magic. The consequences are what they are. On the flip side, there's also been fan content trying to rehabilitate Meg. To give her the happy ending, the show denies her. Fan fiction featuring Meg often focuses on her escaping her family, finding real friends, developing healthy relationships, and discovering self-worth. These stories are acts of repair, attempts to fix what the show has broken. There's something touching about this impulse. People care about Meg. They want better for her. They're willing to put in creative effort to imagine a world where she's happy. This suggests that the character has resonated in ways the show didn't expect or plan for. Artists have created reimagined versions of Meg, where she's beautiful, confident, successful. These aren't just wish fulfillment. They're arguments. They're saying that Meg could be these things if the show allowed it, if the writers could see past their own limitations. The fact that fans can imagine these versions proves that the character has potential the show has never explored. McFarlane himself has occasionally expressed ambivalence about how Meg is treated. In some interviews, he defends it as comedy and satire. In others, he seems uncomfortable, deflecting questions or changing the subject. It's possible that even he doesn't entirely know how to reconcile what the character has become with what she was intended to be. The comparison to The Simpsons is inevitable here. That show has now been on the air even longer than Family Guy, has generated even more episodes, has had even more time to potentially wear out its characters. But Lisa Simpson, the middle child and only daughter in that family, has never been subjected to treatment remotely comparable to Meg's. Lisa is often frustrated, often struggling against her family's limitations and society's expectations, but she's treated as intelligent, talented, and valuable. Her family, despite their flaws, clearly loves her. Homer may be a buffoon, but he's proud of Lisa. When she achieves something, they celebrate. When she's hurt, they comfort her. There's a baseline of affection and respect that never wavers. The difference between how these two shows handle their teenage daughters reveals a lot about their underlying values and sensibilities. The Simpsons, for all its satirical edge, fundamentally believes in the importance of family connection. Family Guy seems to believe in nothing except the next joke. There are other animated punching bags we could compare to Meg. Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty is another character who's consistently demeaned and dismissed. But Jerry is an adult, and his inadequacies are usually framed as his own fault. Plus, the show occasionally gives Jerry genuine wins, and shows that his family does care about him despite their frustration. Squidward Tentacles from SpongeBob. SquarePants endures a lot of suffering, but again, he's an adult, and his misery often stems from his own bad attitude. Plus, the show has given Squidward episodes where we see his depth, his talents, his legitimate grievances. We understand why he is the way he is. Meg is different because she's a child, because she's done nothing to deserve her treatment, and because the show provides no counterbalance, no moments of genuine triumph or happiness. She's purely a victim with no agency, no hope, and no escape. If Meg Griffin's story through season 14 is a descent into misery, her journey from season 15 onward is a complicated, imperfect, but genuine attempt at rehabilitation. Something shifted in how the show approached the character, though whether this was due to creative choice, response to criticism, or changing cultural standards is unclear. Starting in season 15, Meg's abuse noticeably decreased in frequency and intensity. The family stopped going out of their way to demean her. The shut up Meg jokes became less common. She was included in family activities more often. Small gestures of affection started appearing, moments where family members acknowledged Meg's value or stood up for her. One pivotal episode in this shift was Peter's sister from season 14. In this episode, Peter's sister Karen comes to visit. She's initially charming, and Meg really likes her, finding her hilarious and cool. But gradually, it's revealed that Karen is actually abusive toward Peter. She bullies him, physically harms him, and emotionally manipulates him. This gives Meg perspective. She realizes that Peter's cruelty toward her likely stems from the abuse he suffered from his sister. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it contextualizes it. And in a rare moment of genuine connection, Meg helps Peter stand up to Karen. They fight her together, literally and figuratively. And afterward, Peter apologizes to Meg. Let me repeat that because it's so unusual for this show. Peter apologizes to Meg. He acknowledges that he's treated her badly, admits that he's taken his own pain out on her, and expresses regret. It's a brief moment, and the show doesn't dwell on it, but it's significant. It's the first time a family member has taken real responsibility for abusing Meg. Importantly, after this episode, Peter's treatment of Meg genuinely improves. He still makes the occasional joke at her expense, but the relentless hostility diminishes. He occasionally defends her. In The Peter Principle, an episode where Meg is being bullied at school, Peter actually intervenes on her behalf. He becomes principal specifically to address the bullying problem. Again, his methods are chaotic and misguided, but the impulse to protect Meg is genuine and new. Chris reconciled with Meg in the episode Criss Cross, though the circumstances were complicated. Meg catches Chris stealing from Lois's purse and blackmails him. This leads to conflict, but eventually to a conversation where they hash things out. It's not as clean as Peter's apology, but it establishes that the siblings can communicate and resolve problems. Lois takes much longer to come around. It's not until season 22's snap plea decision that Lois and Meg have their own reconciliation. The details of this episode are less important than the pattern it establishes. One by one, family members are making peace with Meg, acknowledging the ways they've failed her, and committing to doing better. These aren't perfect resolutions. The show doesn't suddenly become a heartwarming family drama. There are still jokes at Meg's expense, still moments of casual cruelty, but there's also a clear effort to show that the family loves Meg, even if they're bad at expressing it. The abuse becomes less systematic and more the result of individual character flaws rather than a family-wide conspiracy. Meg herself changes during this period. She becomes more confident, more willing to stand up for herself. She fights back against bullies, both at school and at home. She develops actual friendships, maintaining relationships with Patty, Esther, and Ruth that seem genuine rather than just sad alliances of misfits. Most importantly, Meg stops internalizing the abuse. In earlier seasons, she seemed to believe she deserved the treatment she received. She saw herself as inherently inferior, worthy of contempt. In later seasons, she knows better. She recognizes that her family's treatment of her is wrong, even if she sometimes chooses to tolerate it for the sake of family cohesion. This shift in Meg's self-perception is crucial. It changes her from a pure victim to someone with agency. She's not happy with her situation, but she's making conscious choices about how to navigate it. Sometimes she decides to stand up for herself. Sometimes she decides to let things go. But they're her decisions, made with full awareness. The show also starts giving Meg legitimate talents and interests beyond just desperately trying to be popular. We see her riding horses with skill. She excels academically, getting good grades and showing intelligence. She has musical ability. These aren't major plot points, but they're scattered throughout episodes, slowly building a picture of Meg as a capable, multidimensional person. In one particularly interesting episode, Yacht Rocky, Meg actually gets a genuinely sweet romantic storyline. She meets a guy named Chad on a yacht rock cruise. They have a real connection, with mutual attraction and respect. Chad seems to actually like Meg for who she is, not despite her supposed flaws, but including them. It's the first time in the series that Meg has a relationship that feels healthy and balanced. Of course, because this is Family Guy, it ends in tragedy. The yacht is hit by a rogue wave and capsizes. Chad is decapitated. Meg carries his corpse around for the rest of the episode, unwilling to let go of the one good thing she's found. It's darkly comic, but also genuinely sad. The show gave Meg happiness, then snatched it away, but at least it gave her the happiness first. That's progress, in its own twisted way. By seasons 20 and 21, Meg's treatment has stabilized into something far less extreme than it was during the dark years of seasons 8 through 14. She's still not the most prominent family member. She's still often the butt of jokes, but she's treated as an actual member of the family rather than an outsider they tolerate. Some fans have expressed mixed feelings about this rehabilitation. On one hand, it's good to see Meg being treated better. On the other hand, it doesn't erase or address the years of abuse. The show has never done an episode that truly reckons with what happened, that allows Meg to express the full extent of her anger and pain, that shows the family doing the real work of repair. Instead, they've just quietly shifted the dynamic and hoped viewers wouldn't notice or care. It's a bit like if someone punched you in the face every day for 10 years, then stopped and expected you to be grateful without ever apologizing for the 10 years of punching. The improvement is real, but it's not the same as justice or healing. Still, from a pragmatic standpoint, it's probably the best we could hope for from Family Guy. This is not a show that does serious, sustained character work. It's not built for extended arcs or deep emotional payoffs. The fact that they've made Meg's treatment better, even without a big explanatory episode, is more than many fans expected. There's also a practical consideration. Family Guy has been renewed through season 28 at least. It's going to keep going for years. Having one of your 5 main characters be purely a victim with no hope or happiness is unsustainable. Eventually, it stops being funny and just becomes depressing. The show had to change something about Meg's situation, or risk viewers tuning out entirely. The writers may have also simply gotten tired of the joke. When you've been doing the same gag for 15 plus seasons, even if it's working, you start looking for new territory to explore. Maybe they realized there were more interesting stories to tell with Meg if she wasn't just a punching bag. Or perhaps, more optimistically, some new writers joined the staff who brought different perspectives. As conversations about representation, mental health, and media responsibility have evolved in the broader culture, maybe the Family Guy writers' room evolved too. Maybe someone spoke up and said that the Meg abuse had gone too far and needed to change. We can't know for certain what motivated the shift. What matters is that it happened and has mostly stuck. Meg in Season 22 is a vastly different character than Meg in Season 10, not because her personality has changed, but because her circumstances have. She has a family that, while still dysfunctional, at least acknowledges her existence and value. She has friends. She has interests. She has a life beyond being abused. Is this enough? Does it make up for the years of cruelty? That's for each viewer to decide. But it is something. It's an acknowledgement, however imperfect, that how the show handled Meg was problematic and needed correction. Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg for over 20 years and 400 episodes, has remained remarkably positive about the role throughout. In interview after interview, she expresses genuine love for the character and appreciation for the job. She calls Family Guy the best job ever and says Meg is low-key her favorite character on the show. This is worth considering when we think about Meg's treatment. Kunis is the person most intimately connected to the character. She's the one bringing Meg to life, making choices about her line readings, finding the humor and pathos in the material. If Kunis finds the role fulfilling and doesn't feel uncomfortable with Meg's treatment, what does that mean? It could mean that the criticisms are overblown, that we're taking a cartoon too seriously, that the line between fiction and reality is clear enough that there's no real harm being done. Kunis is a professional who understands what she's doing and is fine with it. Or it could mean that Kunis, while talented, doesn't think deeply about the implications of the character she plays. She sees it as a job, enjoys the work, cashes the checks, and doesn't concern herself with cultural criticism or academic analysis. That doesn't make her wrong, but it doesn't invalidate the criticism either. It's also possible that Kunis does think about these things, but keeps her thoughts private. Entertainment industry professionals often have to be diplomatic in interviews. They can't badmouth their own projects or colleagues. Even if Kunis had concerns about Meg's treatment, she might not feel comfortable expressing them publicly. Whatever Kunis personally thinks, she's done remarkable work with the role. She's brought depth and humanity to a character that could have been one-dimensional. Even in the worst episodes, where the script is just punishing Meg relentlessly, Kunis finds moments of real emotion. Her performance is often the only thing that makes those episodes bearable. She's also shown impressive range with the character. She can do desperate Meg, angry Meg, sad Meg, briefly confident Meg, violent Meg, vulnerable Meg. She shifts between these modes seamlessly, always finding the truth in whatever ridiculous situation the writers have put Meg in. In a 2022 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Kunis reflected on growing up with the character. "I was 15 when I started," she said. "I'm now in my 40s. I've literally spent more time as Meg Griffin than not." She also noted that the job has given her financial security and allowed her to pursue other projects without worrying about paying the bills. This is an underappreciated aspect of voice acting work. It's steady, well-paying, and not as demanding as on-camera work. Kunis can record her episodes in a day or two, leaving the rest of her time free for movies, family, other interests. It's an ideal arrangement for someone who wants to work in entertainment, but also have a life outside it. Seth Green, who voices Chris, has had a similar experience. He's been with the show since the beginning, and Family Guy has been a constant in his career, even as he's done movies, other TV shows, and created Robot Chicken. Alex Borstein, the voice of Lois, has won Emmys for her work on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, while continuing with Family Guy. The show's accommodating recording schedule allows its cast to have full, diverse careers. This is part of why the cast stays loyal to the show, even as it's evolved and changed over the years. It's not just a job. It's a good job, one that's hard to find in entertainment. That creates a certain investment in the show's success and a reluctance to criticize it too harshly. The writer's room has also evolved over the years. While it started as predominantly male, as MacFarlane admitted, women have gradually joined the staff. This hasn't led to any single episode where Meg's treatment is explicitly addressed and changed, but it may have contributed to the gradual softening of how she's written. Having diverse perspectives in a writer's room matters. When everyone shares similar backgrounds and experiences, blind spots are inevitable. Someone who has personally experienced being a teenage girl, being socially excluded, being scapegoated by family, will bring different insights to the table. They'll catch things that others miss. They'll push back on ideas that others think are funny, but are actually harmful. This doesn't mean that male writers can't write good female characters, or that you need to have experienced something to write about it. But diversity helps. It makes the work richer, more textured, more aware of its implications. The show has also brought in writers from different comedic traditions over the years. Some come from alt-comedy backgrounds, others from late-night talk shows, others from internet comedy. This variety has kept the show fresh, preventing it from becoming too stuck in one particular style or set of references. As Family Guy has aged, it's also had to contend with changing standards around comedy. What was edgy in 1999 or 2005 is not necessarily acceptable today. The show has had to navigate this evolution while staying true to its boundary-pushing identity. Some of the show's older episodes have aged poorly. Jokes that were considered daring or subversive at the time now come across as needlessly cruel or offensive. The show has been criticized for jokes about sexual assault, domestic violence, homophobia, transphobia, and racism. Some of these criticisms are fair. The show has definitely crossed lines. But Family Guy has also, to its credit, evolved on many of these issues. Characters that were once one-dimensional stereotypes have been given more depth. Storylines that once would have punched down now punch up or sidestep. The show is not as progressive as some would like, but it's not as reactionary as others fear. The question with Meg is whether her treatment falls into the category of comedy that's aged poorly or comedy that was always problematic. I'd argue it's a bit of both. The early Meg abuse, from seasons 4 through 7, reflects a particular moment in comedy when being maximally offensive was considered inherently funny. Boundaries existed to be pushed. Sacred cows existed to be slaughtered. The audience was supposed to appreciate the audacity of the joke, even if the joke itself wasn't particularly clever. That style of comedy has fallen out of favor. Audiences still appreciate edgy comedy, but they want it to be smart, to have a point of view, to be punching up at power rather than down at the vulnerable. A joke about a teenage girl being systematically abused by her family doesn't punch up. It punches way, way down. The middle period of Meg abuse, seasons 8 through 14, is harder to justify even in its historical context. By this point, the show knew exactly what it was doing. It had received criticism. It had seen the fan reactions. And it chose to intensify the abuse anyway. This wasn't ignorance or thoughtlessness. It was a deliberate creative choice. The later period, from season 15 onward, represents the show trying to correct course without explicitly acknowledging what it's correcting. It's an imperfect solution, but it's something. Looking at the entire arc of Meg Griffin's character across 20-plus seasons, we see a story that's accidentally profound. We see a character who suffers enormously, who is ground down by relentless abuse, who develops trauma responses and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And then we see that character slowly, imperfectly, begin to recover, begin to find self-worth, begin to demand better treatment, and sometimes receive it. Is that a redemption arc? Not really. Meg hasn't redeemed herself because she never needed redemption. She wasn't the problem. But maybe it's a recovery arc, a healing arc. Maybe the show, without quite intending to, has told a story about surviving abuse and coming out the other side. That's probably giving Family Guy too much credit. The show doesn't think of itself as telling important stories about abuse and recovery. It thinks of itself as making people laugh. But art often does things beyond the creator's intentions. Stories take on lives of their own. Characters become more than what they were designed to be. Meg Griffin was designed to be a straight man, a normal teenager, to contrast with her ridiculous family. Then she was redesigned into a punching bag, a target for cruel jokes. Now she's something else, something more complicated. She's a survivor. She's a character who endured years of abuse and came out the other side. She's scarred, but not broken. Damaged, but not destroyed. That's actually a powerful narrative, even if it was accidental. It's a story that resonates with people who have been through similar experiences. It gives them a mirror, a way to see their own pain acknowledged and validated. It also gives them hope. If Meg can survive the Griffin family and start to build a better life, maybe they can survive their own difficult circumstances. This doesn't make the abuse okay. It doesn't justify the years of cruel jokes or the writer's admitted therapeutic enjoyment of torturing a teenage girl character. But it does give the overall story a meaning and value that transcends any individual episode. Let's talk about some of the specific episodes that define Meg's journey, because while we've covered the general arc, there are particular installments that crystallize different aspects of her character and her treatment. Don't Make Me Over from Season 4, as we discussed, is the first episode to make Meg's supposed ugliness a central plot point. It establishes the template for many episodes to come. Meg is rejected. Meg transforms herself. Meg is temporarily accepted. The transformation fails, or is reversed. Meg returns to rejection. It's a cycle we'll see repeated many times. Let's Go to the Hop from Season 2 is actually an earlier, pre-abuse escalation episode, where Meg tries to be cool by getting addicted to toad licking, which is giving kids highs at her school. It's absurd, but it shows Meg's desperation to fit in. The episode is relatively sympathetic to her, showing her as a good kid who makes a mistake out of social pressure. Barely Legal from Season 5 is the Brian and Meg obsession episode. It's uncomfortable on multiple levels. Meg's desperate crush on Brian, Brian's horror at being the object of her affection, the family's reaction to the situation. The episode treats Meg's feelings as inherently ridiculous while also acknowledging that Brian, an adult dog, should definitely not be involved with a teenage girl, even if she wants it. It's a mess, but it does at least recognize that the situation is inappropriate. Prick Up Your Ears from Season 5 features Meg dating a guy named Doug who breaks up with her the instant he sees her naked. It's one of the cruelest jokes in the series, designed to humiliate Meg as thoroughly as possible. The message is that Meg is so repulsive that no amount of emotional connection can overcome the horror of her body. It's mean-spirited with no redeeming qualities. Peter's Daughter from Season 6, London on 6, gives Meg a brief engagement to Michael Milano. For a moment, it seems like Meg might actually get something she wants. But of course, it falls apart, and Meg is left humiliated. The episode does at least allow Meg some agency. She's the one who realizes she's not actually pregnant and decides to tell Michael the truth, even knowing it will end their relationship. It's one of the few times Meg makes a mature, honest choice. Stewie Kills. Lois and Lois Kills Stewie. The two-part Season 6 finale is mostly about Stewie's matricidal fantasies, but it includes a subplot where Meg becomes popular after Lois's apparent death. With her mother gone, Meg transforms herself and starts dating a popular guy. But it's all a simulation or fantasy. And when Lois returns, Meg reverts to her usual status. It's another example of the show teasing Meg with happiness only to take it away. Dial Meg for Murder from Season 8 is the prison episode where Meg becomes tough and violent. It's satisfying on a visceral level to see Meg fight back, to see her family fear her for once. But the execution is deeply problematic, as we discussed earlier. Meg doesn't just defend herself. She becomes an abuser, using violence and sexual assault as weapons. The show can't seem to imagine Meg having power without her becoming monstrous. Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10 is the infamous lightning rod episode. We've covered this extensively, but it bears repeating. This is the episode where the show explicitly acknowledged Meg's abuse, labeled it correctly, and then justified it. It's the low point of Meg's treatment because it's so calculated, so aware of what it's doing. Quagmire and Meg from season 10 is interesting because it's one of the few times the family shows genuine concern for Meg's well-being. They don't want her hanging out with Quagmire because they know he's a predator. Their protectiveness is self-interested, but it's still protectiveness. It shows that on some level, they do care about Meg. Valentine's Day in Quahog from season 11 gives Meg the kidney harvesting date storyline. It's absurd and dark, but there's something almost sweet about how Meg insists on finishing the date properly, even after being mutilated. She has standards, even if they're incredibly low. The fact that she keeps the kidney in a jar afterward is disturbing, but also kind of touching. It's a memento of a day where someone, however criminally, paid attention to her. Amish Guy from season 12 gives Meg her relationship with Ezekiel. This is one of the few genuinely sweet Meg storylines. Ezekiel likes her for real. There's no joke about her appearance or her desperation. They have a legitimate connection. The fact that circumstances prevent them from being together is sad, but not a reflection on Meg's worth. It's just life being unfair. Chris Cross from season 13 features Meg catching Chris stealing and blackmailing him. It's not Meg's finest moment, but it does show her standing up for herself and using the leverage she has. The eventual reconciliation between the siblings is one of the first steps toward Meg's rehabilitation. A fistful of Meg from season 12 is the defeating the bully episode. As we discussed, the resolution is problematic because Meg wins by being gross rather than by being strong or smart. But at least she wins. The bully backs down. Meg achieves a victory, even if the terms of that victory are dehumanizing. The Peter principle from season 15 is significant because it's Peter defending Meg from bullying. He becomes the school principal specifically to address the problem of Meg being mistreated. His methods are chaotic, but his heart is in the right place. It's one of the first clear signs that the show is changing how the family treats Meg. Peter's sister from season 14, as we discussed, is where Peter apologizes to Meg and their relationship begins to genuinely improve. It's a turning point, the moment where the show seems to decide that the Meg abuse has run its course and it's time for something different. Yacht Rocky from season 17 gives Meg her romance with Chad. It's sweet, genuine, and tragically short-lived. The fact that Chad is killed doesn't negate the happiness Meg felt while he was alive. For once, someone loved her, and that matters even if it couldn't last. Looking at these episodes chronologically, you can track Meg's journey. Early episodes where she's normal and relatably awkward. The shift in season 4, where the abuse begins in earnest. The intensification through seasons 8 through 14. The gradual softening and rehabilitation from season 15 onward. Each episode is a data point, and together they form a trajectory. It's worth noting that even during the worst periods, not every episode featured Meg abuse. Many episodes didn't include her significantly at all. The show has such a large cast, and so many different story possibilities that Meg could easily be absent or peripheral. When I talk about the relentlessness of her abuse, I'm talking about the pattern across seasons, not necessarily every individual episode. But when the show did focus on Meg, particularly during seasons 8 through 14, the abuse was almost guaranteed. There was a period where you could predict with fair accuracy that a Meg-centric episode would feature her being humiliated, rejected, or harmed in some way. That's the relentlessness. Not every episode, but every Meg episode. The later seasons have broken this pattern. Meg-centric episodes now might feature her having normal teenage experiences, going on a date, trying out for something, having an adventure with her friends. The abuse isn't guaranteed anymore. Sometimes Meg just gets to be a character in a story rather than a punching bag. This is progress, even if it's not everything we might want. It suggests that the writers have found new ways to use Meg. New stories to tell with her that don't require systematic cruelty. We need to address the elephant in the room. Is Meg Griffin truly the most abused character in television history? That's a big claim, and we should examine it carefully. First, let's define terms. When we say abused, what do we mean? Physical violence, Emotional manipulation? Neglect? Systematic degradation? All of the above? Meg certainly experiences all these forms of abuse throughout the series. She's physically hurt, emotionally manipulated, neglected by her family, and systematically degraded by almost everyone in her life. Second, what's our scope? Are we only talking about American television? Only animated series? Only sitcoms? The comparison changes depending on how we frame it. If we're looking at animated sitcoms specifically, Meg has a strong case for being the most abused character. As we discussed earlier, characters like Jerry Smith, Squidward Tentacles, and even Milhouse Van Houten from The Simpsons endure mistreatment, but not with the same relentlessness or from the same sources. Meg is unique in being systematically abused by her entire family, her peers, and essentially everyone she encounters, with few exceptions and little respite. Lisa Simpson, the most direct comparison, is treated vastly better by her family despite also being a daughter in a dysfunctional household. Tina Belcher from Bob's Burgers is awkward and socially challenged, but is loved by her family. Even characters on adult animated shows known for being dark and edgy don't quite match Meg's situation. If we expand to live-action sitcoms, we find some contenders. Meg from Married with Children is mistreated by her family, particularly her father Al, but it's less systematic and extreme. The show balances the abuse with moments where the family comes together. Meg Griffin gets no such balance. Kimmy Gibbler from Full House is treated as annoying by the Tanner family, but again, it's nothing like what Meg Griffin endures. Kimmy is tolerated, and even sometimes embraced. She's not systemically degraded. In dramatic television, we have characters who suffer enormously. Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones is tortured physically and psychologically. Characters in shows like Breaking Bad, The Wire, and The Sopranos endure terrible things. But these are dramas where suffering is part of the narrative stakes. We're supposed to feel the pain and horror of what these characters experience. It's not played for laughs. Meg's situation is unique precisely because it's played for laughs in a sitcom context. The abuse is meant to be funny. That's what makes it so disturbing, and what gives her a strong claim to being the most abused character. It's not just the quantity or severity of the abuse. It's the context in which it occurs and the attitude the show takes toward it. There are characters in other shows who are repeatedly humiliated or hurt. Kenny McCormick from South Park dies in almost every early episode, but his deaths are so cartoonish and absurd that they don't carry the same emotional weight. We're not meant to feel Kenny's suffering. It's pure absurdist comedy. Malcolm from Malcolm in the Middle is often frustrated and put upon by his family's chaos, but his family loves him. They're dysfunctional, but they support each other. The suffering Malcolm endures is balanced with affection and moments of triumph. Charlie Brown from Peanuts is constantly disappointed and rejected, but his suffering is existential and philosophical, rather than systematic abuse. His friends aren't trying to hurt him. The universe is just indifferent to his struggles. And importantly, Peanuts treats Charlie Brown's suffering with a degree of pathos. We're meant to sympathize with him. What makes Meg's case for most abused character compelling is the combination of factors. Systematic abuse from all sources. Emotional, physical, and psychological mistreatment. Relentlessness across hundreds of episodes and 20+ years. A complete absence of safe spaces or supportive relationships for much of the show's run. And perhaps most importantly, the show's attitude that this is all hilarious and warranted. So yes, I think Meg Griffin has a legitimate claim to being the most abused character in television history, particularly when we limit ourselves to non-dramatic series. The systematic nature of her mistreatment, the duration, and the context in which it occurs make her situation uniquely awful. But this isn't a competition we should necessarily want to win. There's no prize for being the most abused character. It's not an achievement. It's an indictment of the show's creative choices and a sad commentary on what audiences were willing to accept in the name of comedy. As Family Guy continues into its 23rd season and beyond, the question becomes, what's next for Meg Griffin? Where can the character go from here? The show has already made significant changes to how Meg is treated. The family is less overtly abusive. Meg has more agency and self-respect. She has friends and interests. The foundation has been laid for Meg to be a more well-rounded character. One possibility is that the show continues this trend, gradually giving Meg more development and better storylines. Maybe she gets a real, lasting relationship with someone who appreciates her. Maybe she goes to college and finds a community where she fits in. Maybe she discovers a talent or passion that gives her identity beyond being the Griffin family's scapegoat. Another possibility is that the show has course-corrected as much as it plans to and will maintain the current status quo indefinitely. Meg will be treated better than she was in seasons 8 through 14, but won't become a central focus. She'll be a solid supporting character, present and accounted for, but not the star of many episodes. A third possibility is that the show backslides. Comedy writers often fall back on what's worked before. If the writers run out of ideas, or if new staff members come in who don't understand the progress that's been made, we could see a return to the worst aspects of Meg's treatment. This would be disappointing, but not shocking. There's also the possibility that Meg could be written out of the show entirely. She could go to college in a different state, reducing her appearances to occasional visits. She could get married and move away. The show could simply decide that they don't know what to do with Meg anymore and minimize her role. Personally, I hope the show continues to develop Meg into a more three-dimensional character. There's so much potential that's never been explored. What are Meg's dreams? What does she want out of life? What are her talents beyond what we've seen? What would a healthy, happy Meg look like? The show has spent so much time breaking Meg down that showing her building herself back up could be genuinely compelling. Not in a very special episode way, but gradually, over multiple seasons. Let Meg succeed at something. Let her find real love. Let her discover self-worth, not because someone else validates her, but because she validates herself. This doesn't mean Meg has to become perfect, or that the show has to become earnest and sincere. Meg can still be awkward. She can still have setbacks. She can still be part of comedic storylines. But she should be a character rather than just a target. The actors will likely stay with the show as long as it continues. Voice acting is a good gig, and the Family Guy cast has been remarkably stable over the years. Kunis has shown no signs of wanting to leave, and she has said she'll continue as long as they keep making the show. MacFarlane, while less involved in day-to-day production than he once was, still provides voices and serves as an executive producer. The show has momentum and could easily run for several more seasons. The writer's room will continue to evolve. New people will join, bringing fresh perspectives. Older writers will move on to other projects. This natural turnover creates opportunities for the show to change and grow, to try new things, to correct old mistakes. Family Guy is now at a point where it's been on the air longer than many of its current viewers have been alive. It's a legacy show, part of television history. How it chooses to handle its characters in these later seasons will be part of that legacy. Meg Griffin's story is part of Family Guy's legacy too. The question is whether that story will be remembered as an example of comedy that aged poorly, a cautionary tale of how not to write a character, or whether it will be remembered as a character who overcame terrible treatment to become something more, a testament to resilience in the face of abuse. The answer to that question is still being written. There are lessons to be learned from Meg Griffin's journey, both for creators and for audiences. For creators, Meg's story illustrates the importance of diversity in writers' rooms. When Seth MacFarlane admitted that the male-dominated writing staff didn't know how to write a teenage girl and found it therapeutic to abuse her character, he was inadvertently highlighting a massive failure of imagination and empathy. If you don't know how to write a character, the solution is not to punish that character for your own inadequacy. The solution is to learn, to bring in people who have relevant experience, to do the work required, to understand perspectives different from your own. Meg's story also illustrates the importance of considering the long-term implications of character choices. What seems like a funny gag in one episode becomes problematic when repeated across hundreds of episodes. Patterns matter. Consistency matters. When you make a character's suffering the defining characteristic of their existence, You've stopped telling a story and started enacting abuse. For audiences, Meg's story is a reminder to think critically about what we're watching. Comedy doesn't exist in a vacuum. The attitudes and behaviors normalized in fiction influence real-world attitudes and behaviors. When we laugh at Meg being silenced, dismissed, and degraded, what are we laughing at? What message are we internalizing? This doesn't mean we can't enjoy Family Guy or that finding Meg's mistreatment funny makes someone a bad person. Comedy is subjective, and people find different things amusing. But it does mean being thoughtful about our entertainment, being willing to question whether certain jokes have aged well or ever worked in the first place. Meg's story is also important for people who identify with her, who see their own experiences of being scapegoated, bullied, or dismissed reflected in her character. For these viewers, Meg provides representation, however uncomfortable. She shows that others have experienced similar pain, that they're not alone in their suffering. The show's gradual rehabilitation of Meg in later seasons also provides a form of hope. Things can get better. Families can change. You can survive being the scapegoat and come out the other side. These are important messages for people who are living through difficult circumstances. At the same time, Meg's story is a reminder that abuse leaves scars. Even when the mistreatment stops, even when relationships improve, the damage that's been done doesn't just disappear. Meg's darker tendencies, her desperate need for affection, her difficulty setting boundaries, these are all consequences of her treatment. The show doesn't dwell on this, but it's there in the character. Real people who survive abuse deal with these same issues. They have to learn to trust again, to believe they deserve good treatment, to break the patterns they developed to survive. It's hard work, and it doesn't happen quickly. Meg's ongoing struggles with these issues, even as her circumstances improve, reflects that reality. For parents, Meg's story is a cautionary tale about family dynamics and scapegoating. The Griffin family functions by designating Meg as the problem, the source of all dysfunction. As long as everyone can blame Meg, they don't have to look at their own issues or take responsibility for their own behavior. This is how scapegoating works in real families. One person, often a child, is designated as the problem. All the family's issues are projected onto this person. The scapegoat is labeled as too sensitive, too difficult, too demanding. The rest of the family can maintain the illusion that they're fine because all the problems are concentrated in one person. Breaking this pattern requires the entire family to change, not just the scapegoat. The scapegoat has to stop accepting the role, but everyone else has to stop assigning it. That's difficult work that many families never do. The fact that the Griffin family has made some progress in this area, however inconsistent, is actually somewhat realistic. Change is possible, but it's gradual and imperfect. For young people, particularly teenage girls, Meg's story is complicated. On one hand, seeing a character like Meg can be validating if you've experienced similar treatment. It shows you're not alone, that others have felt the way you feel. On the other hand, seeing that treatment played for laughs can be deeply hurtful. It suggests that your pain is comedy, that people find your suffering entertaining. The message young people should take from Meg's story is not that abuse is funny or acceptable. It's that even in the darkest circumstances, you can survive. You can find strength. You can eventually get to a place where things are better. But you shouldn't have to endure what Meg endures. You deserve better, and you have the right to demand better. Meg's story also illustrates the importance of having at least one person in your corner. For much of the series, Meg has no one. She's completely isolated. In real life, having even one supportive person can make an enormous difference. A friend, a teacher, a relative, a counselor. Someone who sees your value and reflects it back to you. If you're going through something like what Meg experiences, finding that person should be a priority. The cultural conversation around mental health has evolved significantly during Family Guy's run. When the show premiered in 1999, mental health was still stigmatized. Therapy was often mocked, and discussions of trauma were less common in mainstream media. Now, in 2025, these conversations are much more open. People talk about their therapists, their diagnoses, their healing journeys. This cultural shift has affected how we view characters like Meg. Behaviors that were once played for laughs, her cutting, her suicidal ideation, her desperate attachment to anyone who shows her kindness, are now recognized as serious symptoms of trauma that require intervention. The comedy hasn't changed, but our understanding of it has. This creates an interesting tension. Family Guy is the same show it's always been, more or less. But we're different viewers than we were in 1999, or 2005, or even 2015. We bring different knowledge, different sensitivities, different expectations to our viewing experience. What we find acceptable or funny has shifted. Some argue that comedy has become too sensitive, that audiences are too easily offended, that we need to learn to laugh at things again. Others argue that comedy has evolved to be more thoughtful and less cruel, and that's a good thing. The debate over political correctness in comedy is ongoing and unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. But with Meg specifically, I think there's a strong case that the comedy wasn't working even by the standards of its time. Critics and fans alike expressed discomfort with her treatment during the peak abuse years. It wasn't just that sensitivities changed. The joke got old. The cruelty became tedious. The show became less funny because the Meg abuse was so relentless that it dragged everything down. Comedy needs variety. It needs surprise. It needs the unexpected. When you know that Meg will be humiliated in every episode she appears in, there's no surprise. The joke becomes predictable, and predictable jokes aren't funny. This is probably part of why the show eventually changed course. Not just because of criticism, though that played a role, but because the Meg abuse had become stale creatively. The rehabilitation of Meg has opened up new storytelling possibilities. Meg as a more confident person, Meg standing up for herself, Meg occasionally winning. These create opportunities for different kinds of comedy. It's refreshed the character in a way that benefits the show. Looking at Family Guy's place in television history, it's clear that the show has been influential. It revitalized adult animation when it came back from cancellation. It proved that there was an appetite for edgy, boundary-pushing comedy. It influenced shows that came after it, from American Dad to The Cleveland Show to countless other animated series trying to capture that same energy. But the show's legacy is complicated by elements like its treatment of Meg. When critics and historians evaluate Family Guy, they'll have to grapple with these problematic aspects. They'll have to weigh the show's innovations and influence against its excesses and failures. Meg Griffin specifically will be part of that conversation. She represents both the show's worst impulses, its tendency to mistake cruelty for comedy, its lack of empathy for certain characters, its willingness to run a joke into the ground, and in later seasons, its capacity for growth and change. The fact that Meg has become a cultural touchpoint, a reference everyone understands, even if they've never watched the show, speaks to the character's impact. Shut up. Meg has entered the lexicon. Meg as a symbol of being underappreciated or rejected resonates with people. The character has transcended the show in interesting ways. Social media has amplified Meg's cultural presence. Memes featuring Meg circulate constantly. TikTok videos reference her. Twitter threads analyze her treatment. YouTube compilations of her worst moments rack up millions of views. In the age of streaming and social media, Family Guy episodes are more accessible than ever, and Meg's story is being discovered by new generations of viewers. These new viewers often have different reactions than original audiences. They're watching the show in a different cultural context, with different expectations about what comedy should do and how characters should be treated. Many younger viewers find the Meg abuse uncomfortable or unfunny, even as they enjoy other aspects of the show. This generational divide in how Meg is received tells us something about how comedy evolves. What one generation finds hilarious, the next might find cringeworthy. This doesn't mean the newer generation is right and the older generation is wrong, or vice versa. It just means that comedy is contextual, shaped by the moment in which it's created and consumed. Family Guy, now in its third decade, has to navigate these different audience expectations. It's a show that was created for a specific audience at a specific time, but it's now being watched by people who weren't even born when it premiered. Staying relevant while honoring your original vision is a difficult balance. The show's solution seems to be evolution without revolution. They've modified how they handle Meg without doing a dramatic mea culpa or completely reinventing the character. They've quietly made her treatment better while continuing to produce the same kind of comedy they always have. It's a pragmatic approach, though not everyone is satisfied with it. Some fans wish the show would directly address what happened to Meg, do an episode where the family apologizes and commits to change. Others think the show should lean back into the edginess and stop worrying about criticism. Most viewers probably don't think about it that deeply. They just watch the show when it's on, and laugh or don't laugh depending on the jokes. The business side of Family Guy also matters here. The show is a valuable property for Fox and Disney. It generates revenue through advertising, syndication, streaming, and merchandise. It's been renewed through at least 2028, guaranteeing years more of episodes. The network wants to protect this investment. That means managing controversy carefully. Going too far in any direction, too edgy or too safe, risks alienating part of the audience. The show has to thread the needle, providing enough boundary-pushing comedy to satisfy its core fans, while not creating the kind of backlash that could hurt the brand. Meg's treatment is part of this calculation. The extreme abuse of seasons 8 through 14 created negative publicity and uncomfortable conversations. The show's reputation suffered. Pulling back on the Meg abuse helped repair that damage without fundamentally changing what Family Guy is. This cynical reading suggests that the show's rehabilitation of Meg was purely strategic, a business decision, rather than a creative or ethical one. That's probably not entirely fair. Writers are people with consciences who can recognize when something has gone too far, but it's also naive to ignore the business considerations that shape creative decisions on a major network show. What's interesting is that improving Meg's treatment has been good for the show, both creatively and commercially. Episodes featuring a more confident, well-rounded Meg tend to be better received. The change has been a win-win, which suggests it was the right decision regardless of the motivation. As we approach the end of our deep dive into Meg Griffin's story, it's worth reflecting on why this matters. Why spend so much time analyzing a cartoon character? Why care so deeply about how a fictional teenage girl is treated in an adult animated sitcom? There are several reasons. First, representation matters. How media portrays people, particularly marginalized or vulnerable groups, influences how we think about real people in those groups. Meg is a teenage girl, a demographic that's often dismissed, mocked, and undervalued in media and society. The way Family Guy treats Meg contributes to broader cultural attitudes about teenage girls. Second, patterns matter. One joke about Meg being ugly is just a joke. Hundreds of jokes across 20+ years become a pattern that sends a message. That message is that teenage girls who aren't pretty, popular, or perfectly behaved deserve contempt. That's a harmful message with real-world consequences. Third, comedy matters. What we laugh at says something about our values. Comedy can challenge power, expose hypocrisy, and make us think differently about the world. But it can also reinforce harmful stereotypes, punch down at the vulnerable, and normalize cruelty. Being thoughtful about comedy doesn't ruin it. It makes it better. Fourth, stories matter. Even in a crude, silly animated sitcom, the stories being told have meaning. Meg's story of enduring abuse, developing trauma responses, slowly finding strength, and beginning to recover is a story that resonates with real people who've lived similar experiences. That story has value, even if it was accidental. Fifth, change matters. The fact that Family Guy has changed how it handles Meg, however imperfectly, demonstrates that change is possible. Shows can evolve. Audiences can influence creative decisions. The conversation between creators and viewers is ongoing and meaningful. Meg Griffin is not real. She's a collection of drawings, voice performances, and scripts. She can't be hurt because she doesn't exist. But she matters anyway because of what she represents, what she reflects, and what she teaches us about comedy, representation, and cultural values. So is Meg Griffin the most abused character in television history. By certain metrics, duration, systematicity, context, she has a strong claim to that dubious title. But more importantly, she's a character whose journey from abuse to recovery, however accidental and imperfect, tells a story worth examining. Looking at where Meg Griffin came from and where she is now, we see a character who has survived against all odds. She's endured more cruelty than any person, fictional or real, should have to endure. She's been broken down, had her self-worth stripped away, been isolated from support, and been made to feel worthless. And yet, she's still here. She's still getting up every day. She's still trying. She's found friends, even if it took years. She's developed interests and talents. She's learned to stand up for herself, at least sometimes. She's discovered that she deserves better, even if she doesn't always get it. That's actually remarkable. In a show known for its nihilism and cynicism, for its belief that nothing matters and everything is meaningless, Meg's persistence in the face of overwhelming negativity is almost heroic. She hasn't given up. She hasn't internalized the abuse to the point where she stops fighting. She keeps hoping, keeps trying, keeps believing that things can be better. There's something genuinely inspiring about that, even if the show doesn't intend it that way. Meg survives. That's her story. Not that she's happy, or successful, or loved, though she has moments of each. Her story is survival. Getting through another day, another humiliation, another rejection, and still being here tomorrow. For people who relate to Meg, who see themselves in her struggles, that's a powerful message. You can survive too. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how hopeless it seems, you can get through it. You can find strength you didn't know you had. You can build a life, even if it's not the life you imagined. That's the paradox of Meg Griffin. She's a character created to be a joke, a target, a punching bag. But through sheer force of persistence, through surviving hundreds of episodes and 20+ years of abuse, she's become something more. She's become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the human capacity to endure. The show didn't intend this. The writers weren't trying to create an inspirational character, but art has a way of escaping its creator's intentions. Characters take on lives of their own. Audiences find meaning that wasn't deliberately placed there. And sometimes, accidentally, a show about nothing creates something profound. Meg Griffin's story is not over. Family Guy continues. And as long as the show airs, Meg will be there. Where her character goes from here remains to be seen. Maybe she'll continue to heal and grow. Maybe she'll stay in this holding pattern of being better than she was, but not as good as she could be. Maybe, though this seems unlikely, she'll regress back to being purely a punching bag. Whatever happens, Meg's journey so far has been remarkable, disturbing, frustrating, and ultimately meaningful. She's a character who matters, who has something to teach us, who represents something larger than herself. In the landscape of television history, there are characters we love, characters we hate, characters we remember fondly, and characters we'd rather forget. Meg Griffin is something different. She's a character we can't quite figure out how to feel about. A character whose mistreatment makes us uncomfortable, but whose persistence makes us root for her. A character who represents both the worst and best of what long-running television can do. The question of whether Meg Griffin is the most abused character in television history may never be definitively answered. But asking the question has value because it makes us think about representation, comedy, ethics, and the stories we tell. It makes us examine our own reactions and consider what we're willing to accept in the name of entertainment. Meg Griffin has been through hell. Cartoon hell, sure, but hell nonetheless. She's been rejected by her family, mocked by her peers, dismissed by her community, and had her every attempt at happiness thwarted. She's developed trauma responses, made unhealthy choices born of desperation, and internalized messages that she's worthless. But she's still here. Still Meg Griffin, daughter of Peter and Lois, sister of Chris and Stewie, resident of Quahog, Rhode Island. Still wearing her pink beanie, still going to school, still trying to find her place in a world that doesn't seem to want her. There's dignity in that persistence. There's strength in that survival. And there's a lesson in it for all of us. Life can be cruel. People can be harsh. Sometimes the universe seems intent on breaking you down, but you can survive it. You can find your people eventually. You can discover your worth, even if others don't see it. Meg Griffin has taught us that, however accidentally. And for that, she deserves better than what she got. She deserves recognition, respect, and the happy ending the show has been reluctant to give her. Maybe one day, in a future episode, Meg will get that happy ending. Maybe she'll go to college and find her tribe. Maybe she'll fall in love with someone who truly appreciates her. Maybe she'll pursue a career that fulfills her. Maybe she'll look back on her time with the Griffin family and realize that surviving them made her stronger. Or maybe not. Maybe Meg will remain in perpetual high school, perpetually on the outside, looking in, perpetually, almost but not quite finding happiness. That's the nature of animated sitcoms. They exist in a perpetual present, characters frozen at certain ages, circumstances reset at the end of each episode. But even if Meg never gets her happy ending within the show, she's achieved something important outside it. She's become a symbol, a reference point, a character people think and talk about. She's sparked conversations about abuse, representation, comedy, and ethics. She's made people feel seen, made them realize they're not alone in their struggles. That's more impact than most television characters ever achieve. Most characters are forgotten as soon as the show ends, leaving barely a ripple in the cultural consciousness. Meg Griffin has made waves. She's changed how people think about animation, comedy, and the treatment of teenage girls in media. So while Meg may be the most abused character in television history, she's also paradoxically one of the most impactful. Her suffering has meaning. Her story resonates. Her survival inspires. That's the final paradox of Meg Griffin. In trying to create a character to dump on, Family Guy accidentally created a character who matters. In trying to make abuse funny, they accidentally told a story about surviving abuse. In trying to make Meg worthless, they accidentally proved she has worth. Meg Griffin is important. Her story needed to be told, even if this wasn't the story the creators intended to tell. And understanding her journey helps us understand larger truths about media, representation, trauma, and resilience. As we close out this deep dive, I want to circle back to where we started. Is Meg Griffin the most abused character in television history? I think the answer is yes, with all the qualifiers and context we've discussed. The systematic nature of her abuse, the duration, the sources, the context, all of these factors make her situation unique and extreme. But more important than claiming some dubious superlative is understanding what Meg's story tells us. It tells us about the danger of lazy writing, of falling back on cruelty when you can't think of better jokes. It tells us about the importance of diverse perspectives in writers' rooms. It tells us about how patterns in media shape cultural attitudes. It tells us about the resilience of the human spirit, even when that spirit is just a fictional character in a cartoon. Meg Griffin has survived 25 years of Family Guy. She's survived being voiced by 2 different actresses. She's survived the show being canceled and brought back. She's survived creative team changes, network notes, and shifting cultural standards. She's survived being the butt of jokes in hundreds of episodes, watched by millions of people. And most importantly, she's survived being systematically abused for the entertainment of audiences. She's come out the other side not unscathed. The damage is real and lasting, but still standing, still trying, still here. That's Meg Griffin's story. And it's a story worth telling, worth examining, worth learning from. Because hidden within this crude animated sitcom, buried under layers of offensive jokes and boundary-pushing humor, is an accidentally profound narrative about abuse, survival, and the long, difficult road to recovery. Meg Griffin didn't ask to be the most abused character in television history. She didn't choose this role, but she's played it for over 2 decades, and in doing so, she's taught us things we needed to learn about comedy, cruelty, and compassion. So here's to Meg Griffin, to her persistence in the face of overwhelming negativity, to her survival against all odds, to her slow, imperfect journey towards self-worth and healing, to her impact on popular culture and critical conversations, and to the possibility, however slim, that her story might have a happy ending someday. She's earned it. Even if she never gets it within the show, she's earned our recognition, our respect, and our acknowledgement that she matters. Meg Griffin matters. Her story matters. And the lessons we can learn from examining her journey matter too. That's what I wanted to explore tonight. The strange, sad, surprisingly complex world of Meg Griffin. The character who was meant to be nothing and became something. The girl everyone treats as invisible who became impossible to ignore. The most abused character in television history who accidentally became a symbol of survival and resilience. If you made it this far, thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for being willing to think critically about media, to examine cultural artifacts with care and attention, to consider what our entertainment says about us and teaches us. If Meg's story resonates with you, if you've been the scapegoat in your family or the outcast in your community, I hope you take from this the message that you can survive. That persistence matters. That finding even one person who sees your worth can make all the difference. That you deserve better than how you've been treated. And that recovery is possible, even if it's slow and difficult and imperfect. Meg Griffin is still out there in Quahog, still dealing with the Griffin family, still trying to make it through another day. And in her own weird, accidental way, she's showing us how to do the same. How to survive when everything seems designed to break you. How to keep going when no one believes in you. How to find worth within yourself when the world tells you you're worthless. That's the legacy of Meg Griffin. Not the abuse, though that's part of her story. Not the jokes at her expense, though those defined her for years. Her legacy is survival, persistence. The refusal to give up even when giving up would be understandable. And maybe that's the most important story television can tell. Not that life is easy or fair or that everything works out in the end, but that you can survive, that you have strength you haven't discovered yet, that even in the darkest circumstances, there's hope for something better. Meg Griffin has been through hell and came out the other side. She's still here, still fighting, still hoping, and that ultimately is what makes her story worth telling and worth understanding. So yeah, Meg Griffin might be the most abused character in television history, but she's also one of the most important, one of the most meaningful, and one of the most accidentally inspirational. And for all those reasons, she deserves to be remembered as more than just a punching bag. She deserves to be remembered as a survivor. And with that, we've reached the end of our exploration. Before we go, I want to remind you one more time to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this deep dive. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more characters to examine, so many more hidden depths to explore in the media we consume. If you want to join me for more of these journeys, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Thanks for spending this time with me tonight. Thanks for thinking deeply about Meg Griffin with me. Thanks for being willing to look past the surface of a crude cartoon and find the meaning underneath. That's what makes content like this worthwhile, knowing that there are people out there who care about understanding media, not just consuming it. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace. The story of Meg Griffin is ultimately a story about all of us, about how we treat people who are different, people who don't fit in, people who struggle, about what we find funny and why, about the messages we send, intentionally or not, through the stories we tell, about the power of persistence in the face of overwhelming adversity, about the possibility of change, growth, and healing. Every time we watch an episode of Family Guy, every time we laugh at a Meg joke or feel uncomfortable with her treatment, we're participating in this ongoing conversation. We're making choices about what we support, what we tolerate, what we think is acceptable. Those choices matter, even in something as seemingly inconsequential as an animated sitcom. Meg Griffin isn't real, but the issues her character raises are very real. Real families scapegoat children. Real teenagers struggle with self-worth and acceptance. Real people survive abuse and learn to heal. Real conversations about representation and responsibility in media shape our culture. Meg's story touches on all of these real issues, which is why it matters. In the end, Meg Griffin's greatest achievement is making us think, making us question, making us examine our assumptions about comedy, about family dynamics, about what we're willing to accept for the sake of entertainment. She's forced us to have uncomfortable conversations, and those conversations have value. So while Meg may not get the happy ending she deserves within the show, she's achieved something arguably more important outside of it. She's made a difference. She's changed the conversation. She's mattered, and that's more than most of us can say. Meg Griffin, the most abused character in television history, has paradoxically become one of the most influential. Her journey from normal teenager to systematic victim to gradually recovering survivor has been witnessed by millions, discussed by thousands, and has left an indelible mark on television history. Whatever happens next in Meg's story, whatever direction Family Guy takes the character, we'll be watching, we'll be thinking, we'll be learning. Because that's what good storytelling does. Even when the story being told wasn't entirely intentional, it makes us think, makes us feel, makes us grow. Meg Griffin has done that. Against all odds, despite being designed as nothing more than a target for abuse, she's become a character who teaches us, challenges us, and ultimately inspires us. She's shown us that survival is possible, that change is possible, that recovery is possible. And in a world that often feels overwhelming, that often seems designed to break us down, that lesson might be the most valuable one television can teach. That we can survive, that we matter, that our stories are worth telling, that we deserve better, that healing is possible, that we're not alone. Thank you, Meg Griffin, for surviving, for persisting, for mattering, for teaching us these lessons, even accidentally, for being more than what you were meant to be, for transcending your origins to become something meaningful. Your story isn't over. Your journey continues. And we'll be here, watching, hoping, rooting for you to find the happiness you've been denied for so long. Because if Meg Griffin can find happiness after everything she's been through, then maybe there's hope for all of us. That's the real message of Meg Griffin's story. Not that life is fair or easy. Not that family always loves us the way we need. Not that things always work out. But that we can survive anyway. That we have strength we don't know about yet. That tomorrow might be better than today. That giving up is never the answer. Meg Griffin is still here, still trying, still hoping, and so are we. Together, we keep going. We survive. We persist. We find meaning even in suffering. We grow even through pain. We become more than what we were meant to be. That's the story of Meg Griffin. That's our story too. And it's a story worth remembering, worth honoring, worth sharing. So subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And remember, whether you're Meg Griffin or someone else entirely, you matter. Your story matters. Your survival matters. And your future is still being written, with possibilities you haven't even imagined yet. Thanks for watching. Sleep well. And never forget that you're stronger than you think you are. Just like Meg Griffin, you can survive anything. You can make it through. You can find your way to something better. Good night.